Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody to this, the first of two webinars on the Acceptable Solutions consultation run by the Water Services Authority Taumata Arawai. It's really gratifying to see the number of people who have registered and who are joining online today. My name's Tim Cadogan. I'm a local government engagement specialist here at Taumata Arawai, and I've also been the chair of the Mixed Use Rural Supplies Advisory Group, which has had quite a bit of input along with others into where we've come to with this consultation. You'll also hear today from Chris Edmonds, Peter Wood and Richard Watman, who will be in support answering the questions and running the presentation as we work our way through. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We won't be taking live questions, i.e. through your microphones, but we would appreciate questions coming into the Q&A. Sometimes they'll come into chat, but if you could try to remember to put it in the Q&A, it stops us having to bounce backwards and forwards between two different parts of the structure. That would be really useful. We're conscious that a lot of people will need to leave at 1 o'clock, so we will be trying to get through the slide presentation to those questions just as quickly as we can. So let's get underway with no further ado and start with the first slide. And I'm just going to very briefly go over what acceptable solutions are and the difference between them and centralised treatment. And that difference, of course, being centralised treatment, you'll be familiar with. It's where you follow the drinking water assurance rules, you maintain a drinking water safety plan, and your water starts in the one spot and moves forward to the end of the pipe, so to speak. And we have a diagram of that here. Pretty simple. What is acceptable solutions? What is the difference? So acceptable solutions kind of flips it on its head. Instead of having the drinking water treatment plant, and we'll go to the next slide, instead of having the drinking water treatment plant at the start of the pipe, we have it at the end of the pipe in a endpoint drinking device, endpoint treatment device. That's the simple, there's three ways of complying with the rules, or two ways of complying with the rules. One is through the centralised treatment, where you have to show compliance with the rules. Two is by adopting an acceptable solution. And the third one is an exemption. We're not going to go down that pathway today. So we're talking about the acceptable solutions. How have we got ourselves here? So we'll go to the next slide, please, Andy. Andy's running the show today. Why are we proposing these changes? Now, we've had acceptable solutions in place for 3 years, roughly, and there are three of them at the moment: mixed use rural, spring and bore water, and roof water. And look, we'd have to say that they perhaps haven't been picked up as much as we would like them to have been picked up. And we've sought feedback on why that is, why what seems to be a great idea has not taken off and flourished as much as perhaps it could. And from that feedback, which came from council staff, from the mixed use rural group that I spoke of earlier, and from councils indeed, is that, look, make it easier to understand which acceptable solutions right for the supply, and also find a compliance pathway that saves suppliers and their communities time, effort and cost, and while delivering that good quality drinking water, safe drinking water to the people who drink it every day. So that's the mission that we've set ourselves. The proposal that we have out at the moment that we're consulting on at present, and why we're here, is where we've come to. But we also appreciate that we haven't tweaked things. We've actually made some fairly significant changes here, which is why we're grateful to see so many people join this webinar and why we're expecting so many really insightful questions. So look, without further ado, I'm going to pass on to Chris, who'll take us through the next few slides. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Tim. So what are the changes? At a high level, we're moving from a set of acceptable solutions that cover a mix of supply types, and that is the mixed use rural acceptable solution, and the other ones cover source water types, for example, spring and bore and roof water. We're moving to a set of acceptable solutions that provide requirements for three common types of smaller drinking water supplies. We're also moving from, where guidance is integrated into each acceptable solution document, to standalone documents that provide requirements for acceptable solution, in which they're going to be supported by a range of separate practical how-to materials that we will produce. Next slide. So proposed changes in more detail. The first one is an overview of the changes proposed. We're moving from, again, confusion about what acceptable solution to use, because two or more sources of water could apply to a single supply. We had a lot of feedback and questions on this from water suppliers, wondering which type of acceptable solution applied to them. So we're moving to three standalone acceptable solutions for different types of supplies. They are firstly the current mixed-use rural supply. We're staying with that one. but we're also introducing a small and medium network size supply and a separate one for self-supplied buildings. The key benefits here is it makes it quicker and easier for drinking water suppliers to understand if an acceptable solution is a fit for their supply. I'll now hand over to Peter Wood to discuss some of the other changes proposed.
Kia ora koutou. Yeah, so at the moment, only in our current acceptable solution, only the mixed use rural acceptable solution has surface water as a permitted source. We're looking at setting up these acceptable solutions so that surface water can be used for all different types of small and medium supplies, so that this widens up the acceptable solutions to more supplies, and more suppliers will be able to adopt them. We're also making the changes to try and be clear which acceptable solution to use, so that it's the characteristics of the supply will be clear to the supplier, and then the supplier will be able to pick up and run with any one of the three acceptable solutions that we're currently consulting on. So even when a supplier provides a mix of source water that's treated and used as drinking water, an acceptable solution will be available. Next slide, please. So all of so the change that we're proposing is around what we're calling validated UV systems, so that's certified to a certain standard. At the moment, or under the current acceptable solutions, all of the ultraviolet treatment devices must be validated to one of a number of standards. And we're moving to an approach where if you've got a small number of people, say in a domestic dwelling, those people could use a UV device that is either validated or not validated. This is really to try and make the acceptable solution more cost effective. So there is quite a considerable cost associated with validated systems. They cost thousands of dollars or more than those that aren't validated, or as it's put there, those that aren't validated cost thousands of dollars less than validated. And that will also allow, as new technology such as LED UV comes into effect, they'll be able to be adopted more easily. And so our intent here is to make it easier for people to get essential treatment in place, moving everybody onto safe water. What we would intend to produce is guidance, so that to help people choose devices that would meet the acceptable solution, whether they're validated or not validated. The not validated option would mainly apply for family homes, and this it allows us to balance some of the needs to make sure that the UV can still kill the germs in the water that can make them sick, but at the lowest possible cost. We'll do next slide, please. And I'll hand over to Chris for this one.
Thanks, Peter. Some other significant changes include we're moving from monitoring testing requirements that in some cases are more rigorous for suppliers that use an acceptable solution than for suppliers who follow the drinking water assurance rules. So we're looking to align the monitoring requirements with the drinking water quality assurance rules where required, and just to make it a lot more balanced between the two. The key benefits are simpler, smaller or lower risk supplies would have, in effect, monitoring requirements that match their size and complexity. So they wouldn't have, similar to the rules, that have requirements for monitoring that match up. Next slide. Another change and some feedback on acceptable solutions. It could be challenging or can be challenging for suppliers to figure out what requirements apply for self-supply buildings in particular. For example, rural schools, marae, other community type buildings. We're moving to a standalone acceptable solution for self-supply buildings. And this will make it very clear what's required of these supplies. And a key part of this is to align with the rules, allowing an increase from a single treatment system to be able to supply up to 10 buildings. So the current limit is 3 buildings, and we're proposing to move that to 10, but that will be subject to requirements around risk or managing risk of increasing that buildings that are going to be on a single treatment. The key benefits here, it makes it easier for self-supply buildings to use an acceptable solution to meet their compliance obligations. And as you may be aware, when you find an acceptable solution, you don't need to complete a drinking water safety plan or source water management plan. And it also provides an additional compliance pathway for the self-supply buildings, for example, as I said, marae, schools, and other community buildings. Next slide, please. And this is, again, from feedback on the acceptable solutions from suppliers. A lot of suppliers have told us that they find them complex and hard to follow. And this is probably because of the current wording, there's a bit of a mix of legal requirements and practical how-to guidance in the current acceptable solutions. And we're proposing to separate them to standalone documents, guidance, and the actual legal documents that comprise acceptable solutions. The benefits are it'll be quicker and easier for suppliers to decide if an acceptable solution is right for their supply, and more importantly, understand and meet the acceptable solution requirements into the future. And this will ensure the community has safe drinking water. I'll now hand back to Peter.
Thank you. So some of in the current acceptable solutions, some of the suppliers have and property owners have told us that it's really, really unclear who is responsible for installing and maintaining their endpoint treatment device. So the water supplier provides water to a property, and then there is a network of pipes that take the water from the edge of that property to where the water is being consumed by people, and the device itself is on the house, which is on private property. The intent of the change is to make this much clearer, so that the acceptable solutions are clearer on supplier and property owner responsibilities for the endpoint treatment system. Earlier this year, we published a policy statement and flowchart to help clarify these responsibilities, and we have looked at this or recognised that this situation where there is where the treatment is located on private property is something that needs to be managed as part of the acceptable solution. The aim of this is to try and make it much easier to work out whether the acceptable solution is a good fit for any particular supply, and also to make it very clear what the acceptable solution requirements are, so that people know what they have to do and can meet them, with the end result of ensuring that everybody has safe water. Next slide, please. Right. So at the moment we have sorry, just go there. So at the moment we have some requirements in the acceptable solution that say that turbidity, so the amount of dirt in the water, must not exceed limits specified by the manufacturer of the UV disinfection unit in the endpoint treatment system. So that can be challenging for, we've had feedback that can be challenging for suppliers to work through. So we're moving to an approach that it requires turbidity to be low enough to allow cartridge filtration to operate for at least a month without replacing filters. And we will be providing guidance on options for managing turbidity. the key for this is that, firstly, if we to use surface water, then there has to be some practical approaches for managing the amount of dirt that is in the water without having filters blocking up so regularly that it becomes an issue for people who are trying to look after their own system. We're also proposing this approach so that water suppliers are not locked into any specific turbidity requirements or any specific process, but that they can make decisions to suit their supply by providing they meet that performance standard that we have set for the lifespan of the cartridge. Next slide, please. Oh, yep, so we'll move on to the next one. Our proposed acceptable solutions. We've talked about 3 types of supply, which we have called mixed-use rural supplies, small and medium-sized network supplies, and self-supplied buildings. So the mixed-use rural supply is defined on how supplied water is used. So at least 50% of the water supplied must be for farm use. That can be for irrigation or stock or other farm uses. And the approach of the acceptable solution is that there is no need to treat all the water that's being used for farm use. You only need to treat that bit of the water that people are using as drinking water. There is no population limits on this particular acceptable solution, just so long as the bulk of that at least 50% is for farm use. So you can have quite a large supply that is primarily for agriculture or horticultural purposes, but just treat the bit that goes to houses or for people to drink. The small and medium-sized network supplies, there is a population limit of up to 500 people, but this is where there is a very small network where the water is primarily used for domestic use. So if a small supply that goes through, say, lifestyle blocks doesn't meet the definition of a mixed-use rural supply, and they supply water to 500 people or fewer, this would be an option for that supply. The self-supplied buildings, we're looking at an acceptable solution that is on-site, where water is provided to 10 or fewer buildings on one property, or neighbouring properties if they're all owned by the same person or group of people. We have specified a maximum population of 500 people, so the acceptable solution is only available for suppliers that serve up to 500 people, and this is primarily an acceptable solution for supplies like schools, marae, sports clubs, community halls, or work sites that have a few buildings on them and just serve their own property. Next slide, please. So here we go. Mixed use rural supplies. This is where we go into it in far more detail. Here are the key features. The source water will be piped to buildings where people are drinking the water. The endpoint treatment device is cartridge filtration and ultraviolet light, UV light, to make the water safe before drinking it. To adopt the acceptable solution, the treatment systems that are chosen must meet all the requirements in the proposed acceptable solution. We've got an option there for UV treatment devices that are not validated when there are a small number of people supply drinking water. Each treatment system can provide water to up to 3 nearby buildings on the same property. And we have, from feedback, we have found a number of rural supplies that chlorinate the water, and we have acknowledged that in the acceptable solution. So suppliers can choose to chlorinate water before it's piped to individual treatment systems. So this is really, I think, about acknowledging some of the things which are already happening. Next slide, please. The small and medium-sized network supplies, the source water again goes through a series of pipes to the building where people are drinking the water, and the endpoint treatment system is cartridge filtration and UV disinfection, UV light. The treatment system must meet all requirements in the acceptable solution. We've got the option there again for non-validated systems, and same consistent approach in terms of 3 nearby buildings and the option of chlorination. Next slide, please. Self-supplied buildings, because this is a more self-contained proposed acceptable solution for a more self-contained supply, the requirements are a little bit different. So we have got our source water that will be treated on site with a filter and UV light. So we've kept to a consistent treatment system. The treatment system must meet all the requirements in the acceptable solutions. We have put some requirements around the distribution system if the treatment system is providing water to a larger number of buildings. So a treatment system can provide water up to 10 buildings, but there are requirements in the proposed acceptable solution that must be met to do that. In this acceptable solution, because it's not really set up for a private home, the treatment system must be validated, so it must meet an international standard. We have put one international standard in the acceptable solution, and we're seeking feedback on the appropriate international standards. Again, we have made a note that chlorination is still an option.
Thanks very much, Peter and Chris. Did you have more, Peter?
No, I was going to say that's the end of my slides.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. So what happens next? We've got consultation through to the end of consultation ends on the 13th of June, rather, I should say, and very much encourage you to put your thoughts in. There'll be a summary of submissions drafted up and then decision and implementation from there. Next slide, please, Andy. So to provide feedback, as we say, up till the 13th of June, if you have further questions, you can email the authority at kōrero@tamataarawai.govt.nz. You can view everything you need to know essentially on the website. That's there. And of course, we've got another webinar Tuesday, the 20th of May from 6 till 7. So easy to access us and easy to access the information. And really, as I said at the start of this, we're not doing a tweak, so we really do value the input from folk outside to see how our ideas, whether they fly or how well they fly. So we'll go on now to probably the bit that everyone's been waiting for, and that's the pārtai, the questions. And there's some really good ones in Q&A. Just noting, if you could use Q&A rather than the chat, that would be really helpful. So the first question came from Stephen from Franklin Water. Considering I have seen, I'll just block my screen there, considering I have seen terrible installation of domestic size UVs, is it really worth giving up the guarantee of safe water? Chris or Peter, who would like to take that one? I'm going to say Peter's going to do that.
Yep, I can certainly take that. Now, I can't see the question, but I think I would acknowledge that that is actually the case. I have seen some fairly how can I put it, poor installations of UVs. We've had to focus on what we can address in the acceptable solution. We have been quite conscious that some of those unvalidated UVs do not meet an acceptable standard and are do not actually work to provide safe water. We have put in, as best we can, a performance standard for the unvalidated UVs. We haven't addressed issues like installation, as this is covered by a different set of legislation. So a plumber who can install UVs, that is currently not under the Water Services Act. It's under the Plumbing, Drainage and Gas Fitters Act from memory. So we have tried to address the things that were in our control and not try to impinge in other places.
Thanks, Peter. The next one, and it's a wee bit of a long one, so I'll read it slowly because you said you couldn't see the question. It's from Matthew Woodfield. He says, I saw that using an unvalidated UV treatment device is mentioned in the full detailed text for the small and medium network supplies of populations under 25, but it's not mentioned in the acceptable solution for self-supplied buildings where the population is under 25. So the question is, does this mean that a non-validated UV device cannot be used with the self-supplied building acceptable solution?
Thank you, Matthew. That is correct. That is the way we have drafted the proposed acceptable solution, and we are certainly seeking feedback on that. We looked at the self-supplied buildings being specifically for buildings like schools, early childhood education centres, marae, those buildings which have a more community focus, and where we didn't want to be tied into having a school that might have currently a roll of less than 25 have an increase in roll and then have to replace the treatment system. So the self-supplied building acceptable solution, we have only put in validated systems, but again, we're happy to receive feedback on that.
Thanks, Peter. Sandy Micklewee asks, the number of suppliers allowed to have non-validated UV units, does this relate to the total number of suppliers per scheme or per UV unit?
I can answer that one as well. That's per UV unit. So we have got some specific requirements for the supply as a whole, and then we've also got specific requirements for the UV, for the population served by the UV unit.
Peter. Stephen asks, a second question from Stephen, on the specific point of the providing the homeowner guidance on sampling requirements, is that not passing on the duty of the drinking water supplier to test their distribution network? The Water Service Act specifically says duties are not transferable. And as a practical example, if you have to let Watercare onto your property to check a water meter, it's no different from accessing an outside tap for a water sample.
Would you like me to take this one as well?
Whoever speaks first gets it, Peter, so that's you.
Fair enough. I think that we had quite a lot of discussion and internal debate, and we are certainly seeking, we would certainly welcome feedback on this in terms of the consultation. The way that when we were going and doing the engagement with water suppliers, this was a specific issue that water suppliers were saying they were finding particularly hard in the rural area, and also the way that we had the previous acceptable solution. We actually, I don't think, had got the information quite right, so we could end up with people driving around a reasonable size scheme taking massive number of samples the way that the previous system was working. The other issue with the way the current acceptable solution is that for some things you only have to test water after one endpoint treatment device, but that really is only valid for the one property, and you might have another 50 properties with separate endpoint treatment devices that might be working differently. So we're trying to put a practical approach in place that addresses the concerns of water suppliers and doesn't require the water supplier to do testing which is not necessarily responsible, not representative of all of the other properties that might be connected to a supply.
Thanks, Peter. The next one's from Marcus. The non-validated UV system, can it be used in a small cafe or daycare or just a residential house? And I can answer that one if you want a break, Peter. It's just a residential house because the risk there is a lot less than if it was in a cafe or a daycare. Did I do it right, Peter?
Yeah, all good.
Thank you. Meredith Smith asks, the main difficulty with deciding what treatment approach is right for a small community supplier is understanding the cost of acceptable solutions versus the cost of centralised treatment. Even with an unvalidated UV, acceptable solutions are not as cheap as you might think. For a small supplier that supplies, say, 25 properties, the cost of an acceptable solution is likely to cost more than centralised treatment, and the annual cost of 25 lamps and 25 or so, or 50 filters is likely to be more than centralised treatment as well. As for LED, the cost is enormous, and they're not made in a size that is suitable for small supplies. All those points are valid. Peter or Chris, do you want to address them?
I was only going to say that one of the things that we're doing with the acceptable solution is to be future focused. So I think, Meredith, you're quite right about the LEDs at the moment, but we know that there's going to be more work that is done, and hopefully in the future they won't be quite as expensive, or they will be made in a size that's suitable for small suppliers. I can certainly see that being a future approach. And the other thing, yes, there will be a point where the acceptable solution becomes more expensive than centralized treatment, and it's so what we're doing is providing an option, but it is we do acknowledge that acceptable solutions are not necessarily a cheap approach in all cases.
Thanks, Peter. Chris, I think this one might fall into your court. From Meredith as well. The policy statement on responsibilities raises more questions than it answers. If a small supplier supplies 25 properties and they all refuse to install endpoint treatment devices, does that mean that the supplier then has to install centralised treatment, or has the supplier taken all reasonable steps and can therefore effectively get away without treatment?
A good question, Meredith. I guess, yeah, that would be something that would look to, based on the feedback coming through, would look to align the policy statement with the acceptable solution or what it might compose. Yeah, that's a particular point. Yeah, it's a really good point there. I guess the policy has a pathway, I guess, in terms of what the supplier has to demonstrate, in terms of the steps they've taken to have systems installed to meet their duties under the Act. But I guess, yeah, if a situation like you're saying, if if they can't get any of these installed, they would have to, I guess we'd have to look at that as an individual approach. Yeah. We'll certainly think about that and take it into account when we're thinking about the acceptable solution, just how that policy interacts with that, because that potentially could be a scenario that could happen. So that's a very good question, and we'll certainly take that into account. If anyone else has anything else to say on that?
No, it is a good question. I'm pretty sure the supplier would be in touch with us to work a pathway through as well. We'd absolutely encourage that. Right, meeting room 2. Kia ora, meeting room 2 has the question, could you please explain the benefit to the consumer of removing access to a validation method that is higher than NSF 55A? It seems similar to legislating against people buying a luxury vehicle on the basis of it being more expensive.
So I can speak to that.
Thanks, Peter.
So one of the things that we were asked to do was to consider the cost of what we were proposing. We did go out to the market and ask questions about the different types of validated systems, and some of the other systems were very much more expensive, like many orders of magnitude more expensive than the NSF 55 Class A. We have put a specific consultation question in that we're really keen to seek feedback on whether this is an appropriate approach, or whether we should reinstate some of the other standards. So it's a live question that we would be keen to receive your submission on.
Thank you, Peter. Vicky asks, does Taumata Arowai at this stage have any more clarity on responsibilities of the supplier? For example, if a rural house takes water from a neighbouring rural property, who would be responsible for installing and maintaining the treatment unit? Also, who's responsible for monitoring? Many rural households are not aware that they are classified as suppliers. Chris, do you want to take that? I think in the first instance, we could recognise that the bill in front of Parliament at the moment means regulation won't apply to suppliers of 25 or less people. So in that one-on-one case, which currently is court, if one anticipates the bill progressing as it's currently put, it won't be, but that to one side.
And I guess it also what pathway you go under, because if you go under the assurance rules, there's slightly different responsibilities and requirements than if you went under an acceptable solution. So I guess it comes down to which compliance pathway to go down. And therefore the responsibilities that the rules of the solutions apply to.
I think it is a good question because the current section of the Act on endpoint treatment does have responsibilities for the water supplier and does also allow the water supplier to get the property owner to install, maintain and test an endpoint treatment device. So there was some complexity there, and I mean, if somebody had some firm views on this, whether that could go in as part of the submission as well.
Thanks, Peter. And just a reminder to folks, if you could pop questions in the Q&A rather than the chat, that would be very helpful to us. Evan McKenzie asks, does Mixed Use Rural Clause 13 in effect override some aspects of Clause 6 of the solution if the supplier opts to require owners of premises to install, maintain and test treatment devices? In other words, the supplier could absolve itself of the responsibility to install and maintain treatment devices, e.g. Mixed Use Rural 4B and E. Who wants to have a crack at that? Chris?
Not having access to looking at those, that would be a really good scenario to put into, unless Peter wants to answer, put into the submission.
I mean, I would be very keen to receive a submission from you about that, Evan. We do have that section 28 of the Water Services Act that covers endpoint treatment devices already has some is quite challenging in many ways, so I would be quite keen to for a submission to see in terms of what you're seeing there.
Thanks, Peter. Jim White asks, where does the legal responsibility lie if using endpoint treatment on a networked supply owner or property owner?
My mind, it's the supply owner. Agree with that, Peter? Under the Act, the duties?
Yes, noting that there is still that transfer clause for endpoint treatment. And I don't know if transfer clause is the right way of describing it, but that's the way I think about it.
Stephen asks, in the proposed changes, you suggest removing the requirement for ancillary equipment such as isolations, air relief valves, etc. Can you outline your reasoning for these changes? Would it not be better to standardise these kinds of installations? Peter.
Yes, so we did remove some of those requirements. We're keen to receive feedback on which of that would be appropriate or how much of it needs to be reinstated. We did have some feedback from suppliers that some of the things that we had required were over and above what was reasonable and practical in some circumstances. I think that we would very much like to receive that as part of a submission. There are some things that we will definitely be considering in terms of whether we need to make some amendments on those specifics.
Excellent. Thanks, Peter. We've got from Andy Clark 2 questions. Firstly, fitting proposed rules around existing community water schemes is difficult. Why can't hybrid acceptable solutions be used, e.g. a mixed-use rural supply for the lifestyle blocks with a campground covered with a self-supplied building category? That's a great question. Chris, do you want to take that?
I think that'd be an excellent one for a submission to give some examples of that in particular, so we can consider, just how we might deal with some of these hybrid ones, because they're going to be more common than we think. But that's an excellent point, Andy, and would really appreciate that coming into a submission.
Yeah, the real life examples and the hypotheticals are incredibly useful for us to try to make things work with, because we don't know everything that's out there. So that's very useful, Andy. Also, from Andy, can the water supply to a self-supplied building come from a community reticulated water supply?
I can answer that. That's not the intent. The self-supplied building is expected to be self-contained, so that if you're receiving water from another water supply, you would be seen as part of that supply.
Thank you. Stephen's made the point on the validation methods available. Councils and medium-sized body corps would likely love to recycle equipment from those validation methods, so keeping them as options isn't a bad idea. Fair point.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Richard, is that passed over, or is that that's your clarification?
It's just clarifying.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, somewhat surprisingly, 20 minutes ahead of time, we've run out of questions. That's noting, not a complaint. But if there are any more, we'll just remind folk that there is another webinar Tuesday night between 6 and 7 next week, if my memory serves me correct. And obviously, if you just go to the Taumata Arawai website, you'll find everything you need, including the consultation document. And as we've heard both Chris and Peter say a number of times this afternoon, we really do want to hear your feedback. This is significant what we're doing. We want to make sure that we get it right. And the way that we do that is to test our ideas against the people who will live with our ideas, which is the 54 or so folk that have joined us here this afternoon. So please do make sure you put a submission in, do use the resources that are available to back them up, and do get in touch with us through that Corredo address through the website if you have any further questions. We're pretty easy to find, and we're always really happy to talk water. In fact, Chris and Peter could talk water all day long. It's remarkable the love they have for talking water and making it safe for the people of Aotearoa, New Zealand. So with no further questions, just realised I'd gone on to chat against my own rules. So Matthew, another question. Thanks, Andy. For water suppliers serving populations under 25 people and wanting to get registered and compliant, when should they seek compliance via the very small communities module of the drinking water quality assurance rules versus the new acceptable solutions? What should they be thinking about? How do you see these new compliance pathways helping these suppliers? Excellent question. Matthew, who wants to take that?
I guess I'd just say that some of the information we're proposing to put into guidance on our website, it's assistance for these suppliers that are struggling with which compliance pathway to follow. So it's a very good point and very good questions in there. And we're going to seek to understand and post some information on that to give a lot more guidance to these small suppliers, particularly, as you're saying, under 25s and smaller suppliers. Anyone's got anything to add on that?
Only that we are very, very much in a watch the space with the bill that's currently before Parliament for those under 25s.
All right, folks, then in that case, there's nothing further for me to do than thank everybody for their attendance today. Thank those that put in those excellent questions. I can see musings happening beside me as we speak. And again, to encourage you to please make your submissions by the 13th of June so that we can have your thoughts. Just have a new post here. So will the slide deck be available on the website? I'm sure that will happen, Andy.
Yes, we'll have we'll post a recording. A link to the recording of this meeting on our consultation site, so you can go back through this webinar and revisit any other questions.
And will we put the slide deck up itself as this follow item?
We probably won't put that on the website, but if you want a copy, just email us at korero@taumataarawai.govt.nz and we can send you out a copy.
And we can make sure we send you one, John, because I think we've got your email address, so we'll get ahead of the game on that one. All right, folks, thank you very much again for your attendance. If you've found this useful, please encourage your colleagues to join our Tuesday evening session. And we look forward to talking to you again and, most importantly, hearing your submission. Ngā mihi nui, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Okay, so we've come to the favourite part of these presentations for us. It's the Pātai question section, and it's good to see that there's quite a few Pātai in here. And I just want you to bear with us because a lot of these Pātai might actually have been, they were entered early in the presentation, and I'm hoping that they may have been covered off as our subject matter experts presented. How can a non-validated UV meet the requirement for multi-barrier approach? Via section 31, you cannot prove the water has been disinfected and therefore cannot comply with that or the need to protect the network.
Sounds like one of mine, Troy. So this has been a subject of quite a lot of debate, and we're very keen to receive feedback in terms of whether the non-validated UV is an appropriate option. We know that one of the requirements of one of the things that the acceptable solution is to cover off is to say that there's no need for a drinking water safety plan, and section 31 is linked directly to that drinking water safety plan. So we're looking at ways that we can provide a disinfection approach without noting that there are already some inequities if somebody is buying a system for a private house. But I'm very keen that this be covered in your submission. Thank you, Deborah.
Kapai. Hey, look, Deborah, I'm not wanting to dodge your next Pātai e hoa, but it is quite comprehensive. And if I'm going to be honest, it looks more like a statement, which we're more than happy to receive via a submission. Okay, moving along. Okay, why does self-supplied buildings acceptable solution require all UVs to be validated, but the small to medium networks do not?
I think that's probably me as well, and it's really about the purpose of the particular building. So the self-supplied buildings are all buildings where people congregate for various reasons, and they might come from the local community or they might come from wider. So that is so that is why we have gone down the route of proposing validation for the self-supplied building. As with all of these things, we are quite keen on a submission. So if you've got an alternate view, we'd like to hear from you, and we'd like to understand why you hold that view. So please, I would encourage you to make a submission on that if you don't agree.
Thanks, Pete. Hey, I think it's going to come straight back to you again, Eho. So we've got a bit of a double banger question here. Why is hardness not on the small to medium network? On the same note, why would you need to test rainwater for iron boron?
Okay, so the hardness one I can answer. and the information on guidance on hardness will be going into guidance. The reason that hardness is not there is that it's not something that we have a MAV for. And there's a number of questions that where we had raised whether we should address these the concern in guidance or within the acceptable solution. There may be some things where the proposals are not consistent with each other, and we would love to hear from you in a submission about that. So rainwater there shouldn't be a need to test for iron or boron. So if you've seen that in something that I've missed, feel free to please make a submission on that.
Kia ora, Pete. Hey, our next one is, why in small to medium networks is there source water guidance for bore and spring and rainwater, but not surface water?
So from my perspective, it was much easier to do the guidance or put some key requirements around bore and spring water and rainwater. I would be very keen to know whether we have got those settings right, and if there is specific requirements that should be in place for source water. The aim is to move most of that to guidance, but I would like, if you're making a submission, we'd love to know what sort of controls you think should be in place and can be in place as part of the legislative instrument.
Kia ora, Pete. I tell you what, Deborah, by crikey, even I'd be interested to read your submission here. Hoy, you've got these questions coming at us left, right and centre. How does the mixed-use rural comply with Section 27 when there are no source water requirements?
That sounds like me again. So one of the things we were wrestling with for mixed-use rural was what was the primary purpose of the water supply, and the primary purpose was not for drinking water. So we have approached the mixed-use rural water supply acceptable solution in a different way than we have with the other ones. I'm still, I'm going to sound like I'm saying the same thing over and over again, but I'm very keen to receive submissions on that as well.
Kapai, Peter. Poor old Chris over here, he's going to get in there somewhere. I'll have to scroll through and find him one. Partai from Steve Reynolds, and hey Steve, I'm just going to give the first part of your partai here, because you go into quite a bit of detail further on down. If using non-validated UVs, does the supplier have to do an E. coli and coliform test every 3 months as it is now?
Right, so we have changed the monitoring requirements and the recognizing that some of the feedback that we got from water suppliers was that there were difficulties with accessing some properties to be able to do a test, and that there were property rights that needed to be taken into account. So the approach and the acceptable solution for the mixed-use rural and the small and medium network is for the water supplier to provide a recommendation to the property owner for testing, E. coli and coliform testing.
And that also, Peter, aligns with our policy on compliance with acceptable solutions and a flowchart on our website. So I think there's a link to that in discussion document that aligns with that recommendation.
Chris, while I've dragged you in there, what does nearby buildings mean? Is that over to you, Ehua, or back to Peter?
Which question is it?
It's just above Steve's. What does nearby buildings mean?
I think that was in relation to the mixed-use rural being able to supply 3 nearby buildings in close proximity.
I think we define that, do we, Peter? But we would like feedback on that, I guess.
It's one of those where we've got. Well, I can tell you where it came from, Deborah. It came from the current acceptable solutions that allowed for up to 3 nearby buildings to be supplied by a single endpoint treatment device. And we didn't take a step back from that, but it may be something for which we would be very interested in your views and the views of others. I know that it's a discussion point. So if you've got 3 buildings that might be on the same property but kilometres apart, or a few hundred metres apart, when does that nearby become a matter of subjective discussion? So that's very keen for views on that.
Kia ora, Peter. Yeah, it's only a small question, but by crikey, there's a bit required to it. Okay. Where do very small communities fit into this? They have been excluded from the name of small to medium networks. There is no guidance for them in the drinking water quality assurance rules.
I think this is an issue that, as always, I'm sort of saying, please make a submission. But in this particular case, is a bit of a stay tuned, because there is currently a bill before Parliament, and that may have an impact on what we're able to do in this area.
But yeah, any examples of that? Yeah, it'd be good to get that via a submission.
All right, crikey, we're getting a bit technical here. Self-supply buildings, point 2A3. Why do the adjoining properties need to be under common ownership? If they are next door, I can't see how that has any safety benefit.
Sounds like another one for me, Troy. So this is primarily about responsibility for the endpoint treatment device, monitoring it, or for maintenance, because Section 28 of the Water Services Act allows the water supplier to put certain responsibilities on the property owner or occupier. Then if we've got one endpoint treatment device that's serving multiple owners, that provides a bit of an issue for us. If there is a way around that, I'm again happy to receive that in the submission.
Hamish Gray has asked, in small to medium or rural water supply situations, is the number of people counted, for example, under 25 per endpoint treatment system? I think you just touched on that in your last part answer, eh?
It would be at each endpoint treatment system, Peter, wouldn't it?
Yes. Yes, so we've got, in the proposed acceptable solutions, we do have a population based for the supply as a whole, for the small and medium networks and for the self-supply buildings. But for the small and medium network, we also have a requirement for a limited number of people from each endpoint treatment device.
From Steve Reynolds, will you also specify that UV systems are maintained professionally and to manufacturers' specifications? And he's given a bit of an example. For example, not many people sterilize the UV or pipe work after service or quartz cleaning.
So at the moment, we have got a clause around maintenance in the proposed acceptable solution, and we are planning to put a lot of the information around maintaining the UV system into guidance. noting that I've seen an awful lot of things which have been less than ideal installations or maintenance issues. So acknowledge that that's the case. And please, again, feel free if you've got some good ideas on how this can be addressed, to put in a submission on that particular clause.
Well, I think the remainder of that question is a great submission. With no drinking water safety plan requirement, there could be very poor record keeping of maintenance or responsibility for maintenance, perhaps an annual renewal of the registration of your water supply. So, hey, Steve, chuck that in a submission there, Hoa. It's sort of ready to go. Ulrich, tēnā koe, Ulrich. For self-supplies, is there a specific site distance required from on-site septic tanks, disposal fields required?
Not at the moment, is there, Peter?
No, we haven't
specific.
specified a distance. We haven't specified a distance at this stage. We've just said keep the water supply away from it.
And the next entry from Ulrich is a mihi to us. I won't read that. We'll just pat ourselves on the back at the end of this. Deborah, just bear with me, whānau. I'll pull the question out of this. Okay. Pete, can you see that question?
Yeah, I can. So there's a bit of a balancing act here. So the drinking water, the source water risk management plan, depending on where you look in the Water Services Act, the source water risk management plan is part of that drinking water safety plan. One of the things that we have to look at when writing the acceptable solution is, firstly, that we are still, that what we are doing is still consistent with the main purpose of the Act, which is providing safe water. We also have to then construct an acceptable solution that is proportionate and doesn't put too many burdens on a water supplier, so none of them will pick this up. So for what we have tried to do in the acceptable solution is set prerequisite requirements that must be there before the acceptable solution can be adopted. Noting that we have, your previous question, we have looked at the mixed use rural acceptable solution in a slightly different way. And it may be that, again, there are certain aspects of what we have put in the prerequisite requirements and source water requirements that you have a view and would like to make a submission on. And in fact, Deborah, I know that you've got lots of experience in this, and we would love to receive a submission on that.
Yeah, that'd be a good point to have in a submission, that one. So we can look at that.
Order. Dave Allen asked, can you clarify how the acceptable solutions proposals relate to campgrounds on council reserves where rainwater tanks are the source?
Sure.
Is that a feature of the current proposal through self-supply buildings? Just to finish that off.
Yes, yes, that's the aim. So the self-supplied building acceptable solution is that's one of the things that would be allowed under that. Certainly within scope.
Thanks, Pete. Small to medium networks, point 13, is the written recommendation for end users to test a requirement or just a recommendation?
Sounds like me again. Unless Chris has got something he wants to say about this one. We can only put requirements onto water suppliers. We can't put requirements on end users. So it is a recommendation. Noting your comment about the wording issue, and we'll look at that.
All right. Hey, look, I don't believe it. We've come to the end of any pātai. Hey, look, whānau, if you've got a pātai, get it in there reasonably quickly. Otherwise, we'll look to close out.
Just want to reiterate, they're all great points and be really valuable to have those in any submissions and examples of where there is a concern where you think it could be redrafted or worded better. Yeah, any real life examples we're particularly interested in as well of water supplies.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, great point. Okay, well, I'm going to say going once, going twice, going 3 times. Hey, on behalf of the Water Services Authority, Taumata Arowai, thank you very, very much for giving of your time. And yes, Dave, the slides from this webinar are available.
I just need to email to Kōrero.
Just to clarify that, could you please email to Kōrero, to our Kōrero email address, and that'll enable us to track you and get these sent out to you.
And we'll post the video on our consultation page as well.
You would have heard from the background there. We'll post our video of this on our consultation page. But thank you very much for your attendance this evening. Pō Mārie.
Thank you.